you hear me now? Can you? Hello, welcome to Space News live stream. I do this live stream every week at the same time, and I typically just go over the videos I posted this week, recap them, and bring up any comments people have made. There's been lots of comments this week and on the videos, so go over those comments. Any chats you bring up, we can talk about any space news topics. And I've got plenty of slides this week. So thank you for joining, whether you're live or you're watching it later. And let's get started this week. So this week I talked first about the Artemis Space Camp. I've been meaning to do this video for a while. I've covered various other lunar designs. I've done the Haven lunar design by Sabrina Kerber, the Diana habitat design, and you can watch those videos. But the one that's most likely to happen is NASA's Artemis Space Camp. It's funded already. Quite a bit of the hardware, at least in design, or now there's actual contracts for some of the hardware. Obviously, the transportation system's well underway. So basically, I talk first of all about NASA's contribution. NASA is obviously the largest space agency. Its funding is around about $20 billion a year. So other space agencies are quite small in comparison. But it is an international consortium. There's 55 countries in total, and the other space agencies are contributing significant parts of the hardware in exchange for seats, either to the Gateway Station or hopefully to the surface of the moon. So first let's talk about NASA's contribution. It's the SLS, the Space Launch System, which is the giant rocket that takes astronauts and hardware to the moon, or to the orbit around the moon, to the area around the moon, and also the Gateway Station, and various other systems such as unpressurized rovers, power systems of various types, the solar, vertical towers, and now a 100 kilowatt nuclear reactor. And also NASA is funding a lot of the science payloads, and a lot of the private companies are funded by NASA. So NASA is contributing huge amounts of money towards the Artemis Space Camp and all the infrastructure needed. But in addition to NASA's contribution, I highlight ESA, the European Space Agency's contribution, and JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency. So, as you can see from this image, you can see here the multi-purpose habitat, or MPH, and this will be Italy's contribution. Oh yeah, I just put up the Space Launch System, if you're not familiar with that. But this is the giant rocket from NASA, powered by hydrogen and oxygen. And right at the very top, I didn't mention it before, is the Orion escape capsule. This is where the astronauts sit, and that will go to the moon, go to orbit around the moon, dock with a Gateway Station, and then dock with the human landing systems, that's Blue Origin and SpaceX's Starship, and then astronauts transfer to the human landing system, down to the moon surface for 6-7 days or whatever, then back up, dock with Orion, and Orion comes back to Earth. So that's the general concept of operations. So ESA will be contributing the multi-purpose habitat. Technically, it's the Italian Space Agency. And this is a rover. I think it's 3 meters by 6 meters. It's quite small space. But one surprising thing is you can actually see it in the render. It does have wheels. So the actual habitat can move. So it could be landed at one point, and then it could be moved to a different area, which is kind of interesting. kind of quite surprising you can do that. They also ESA is also supporting the large lunar lander called Argonaut, and this can provide 2 tons of cargo to the lunar surface. And you can see there it's got a robotic arm, it's got a ramp as well. So this will be how ESA puts hardware on the moon. NASA is also funding lunar landers. The Mark 1 lunar lander from Blue Origin can, I believe, drop 3 tons onto the lunar surface. That may actually fly by the end of this year. It's due to go soon. So Blue Origin may get to the moon before SpaceX with their Blue Origin Mark 1. So the ESA's Argonaut is similar to the Mark 1, except it's 2 tons, and the Mark 1 is 3 tons. And obviously the Mark 2 Blue Origin can actually land astronauts on the moon, 4 astronauts. ESA doesn't send astronauts to the moon. They have no way of doing that. So that's why they have to rely on NASA. And also JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, is contributing hardware. This is the lunar cruiser. This is a pressurized rover. NASA is funding unpressurized rovers, but this contribution from Japan will be pressurized. It's very similar to the multi-purpose habitat. You can put crew in here, and they can stay here for like 7 to 30 days. They can move around, and this vehicle is rated for, over its lifetime, it's rated for 15,000 kilometers. That's about 9,000 miles. Yeah, so it's very useful. It should last 10 years, and this is the Japanese Space Agency's main contribution to Artemis. And I had this graphic here. I don't think I used this graphic on the video, but basically I did. You can see here the multi-purpose habitat. This is a dedicated habitat for the moon, and this will be the hub of the Artemis base camp. This is the very first module that's dedicated as a habitat on the moon. Then we've got this very important 100 kilowatt nuclear power station that we know NASA will now fund, and that should be available by 2030. It should be on the surface of the moon by 2030. And with this, obviously, you can power a lot of science, a lot of equipment, lunar harvesting equipment maybe as well. Then we've got the human landing system, Blue Origin SpaceX. Then we've got over here the lunar terrain vehicles. NASA is funding 3 designs at the moment, but it's going to pick one of them. Maybe the end of this year or beginning of next year. So we'll see about that. Then you've got ESA's Argonaut lunar lander, and then JAXA's lunar cruiser pressurized rover. And I also mentioned France's Starship project, where they're funding, first of all, a power station, and then it will be a shelter, and finally a habitation module. And I mentioned Spartan Space is involved in that. I've done a video on Spartan Space last year, but they're working on habitation modules for the moon, and I think they're flying the Argonaut lunar lander will actually put one of those modules on the moon in the 2030s. So there's basically there's a lot of hardware being built for Artemis, for the Artemis base camp, and these are the missions that are planned. Artemis 2 is getting very close now to launching. I think it's April of next year, so fairly close now. The system's already built, the hardware. The crew are training already. They're doing day training, night training, and learning to understand Orion. And this will be the first time crew have been in Orion. The very first Artemis 1, there wasn't even life support inside Orion. So now you've got all the hardware for Orion, you've got the crew, and it's doing a lunar flyby mission, which is similar to Apollo 8 in 1968. So that will happen next year. And then Artemis 3, scheduled in theory for 2027, but there's just no way that's going to happen in 2027. SpaceX Starship is not ready at the moment. I know it should be flying next week, so we'll see how that goes. But they've still got a lot to do. They've got to do orbital refueling. That's not been demonstrated yet. They've got to do a demo mission. They've got to land on the moon. So there's still a lot of work before Starship is ready. The hardware for Artemis 3 doesn't exist yet. So there's still a lot of work for Artemis 3. So I don't think it's going to be 2027. It could be 28 at the earliest, or later. So that will be the very first crewed mission to the moon for NASA since Apollo 17 in 1972. So that's 50 years. Marty is saying, I wonder if the Blue Origin lander will be ready before lunar Starship. Well, definitely like the Mark 1, but for Mark 2, who knows? Yeah, I don't know. But interesting because, yeah, we'll see how the Starship launch goes. I know this is a Block 2 or Starship version 2, and then it'll be Starship version 3 later. So hopefully version 3 is a lot more successful than version 2. Then Artemis 4 and 5 is basically building out the Gateway Station. NASA provides the power and propulsion system and substantial parts of Gateway, but Europe is providing IHAB, Esprit sections. So it's international contribution for Gateway, but of course, is Gateway even going to be around for much longer? This is the whole thing, right? Maybe SLS is going, Orion's going, Gateway's going. So it's not clear what's happening with major parts of the hardware for Artemis. And then we've got this new thing. We have the nuclear power plant. Maybe that's Artemis 6. Who knows? It's just as initial lunar assets. So maybe that's nuclear power plant. I don't know. Then Artemis 7 is the pressurized lunar cruiser from JAXA. So that'll be early 2030s. And then MPH, I think, is Artemis 8. But of course, I don't know whether SLS exists at this point. I'm guessing it doesn't exist. So yeah, this schedule is highly it's highly likely to change. Even Artemis 3 date is probably wrong. So this is all very speculative, and we'll just have to see what happens. I don't know. So let's see what people are saying about it. So I'll bring this up. So Mike 29 is saying, proud of my country and ASI, that's the Italian Space Agency, for the key modules and infrastructure that will shape the Artemis program. I hope for Luca Parmitano and Samantha Cristoforetti for the first ESA astronauts to walk on the moon in the later Artemis 5 to 6 missions. Yeah, I was thinking of Samantha Cristoforetti when I was thinking about, Italian seat on SLS, on Orion. I was thinking, yeah, maybe Samantha would be the astronaut because I know she's Italian. Luca, I'm not familiar with. But yeah, I mean, there's obviously Italian astronauts who are trained, who've been to the International Space Station. So potentially they could be going to the moon. I mean, if Italy is providing the habitation module, I think that earns them a seat at some point. And then JT Lewis says, USA here, Italy should have an astronaut on one of the early Artemis flights. They deserve it. Yeah, we'll see. I think a lot of the early flights are already booked. I know 2 ESA seats are on, I think, the Artemis 4, Artemis 5. They're just going to the Gateway. But ESA is trying to get a seat for the lunar surface in later flights. And of course, Japan will want a seat, and Canada, and who knows. So, and Wingsley is saying, it's useful, necessary, and vital to staying sane, to keep in mind that with the current White House administration, it's entirely possible that a very different Artemis campaign might emerge from Artemis after Artemis 3. Will we build a base on the moon like this, or could the future look very different? We don't know. Yeah, we don't know what's going to happen. Like, a lot's changed already. We're getting a nuclear power plant. That's new. And SLS, Gateway, and Orion has been cancelled. potentially. We don't even know whether that's happening. So yeah, there's a lot we don't know. So and Anthony Belmont is saying, if we scrap SLS at this late stage, we'll never get to the moon. In the meantime, China is laser focused. The lunar program is very well funded. They can't wait to get to the moon first and rub the White House's nose in the dirt. Then they'll fence off Shackleton Crater and deprive everyone else of what? Well, I have a lot to say about that, and that's the next video I did this week. So, yep, that's the first video anyway. So that's on the Artemis Base Camp. So let's move on to the second video that got even more comments and it's quite controversial. But you know, I just gave my thoughts and opinions, and that is, if I can bring it up, that is Space Race 2.0. US versus China, and I make the comparison between Hare and Tortoise, and lots of comments saying, well, it's the other way around. But I think, as we saw from the last comment, China is racing ahead towards the moon. They're going full speed and they're making a lot of progress. They built a space station in 7 years, from concept to fully operational space station. I think it was in 10 years, 2016 to 2023. They're doing spacewalks. They've done lots of spacewalks. And now they are focused on not just going to the moon, but establishing a International Lunar Research Station, which is a big base station, base camp, with a nuclear power station, a contribution by Russia. So they are very, very focused on the moon right now. And if you're not familiar, okay. Breathe Touch is saying, hey Marty, love what you're doing. I want to start a space company to colonize Mars. Any advice on where to start? I'm not a space engineer. I don't know. Maybe there's some people who can help you with that. Yeah, I don't know. I think you need a lot of money first. Anyway, so yeah, this is the Chinese hardware. So you can see on the right hand side, you can see the lunar lander called Lanyu, and then you've got the command module on the left, which is called Mengzhou, which is just an upgraded version of Shenzhou, which is their capsule that ferries astronauts to their space station. So they just upsized it, made it bigger, and this is now called Mengzhou. And yeah, so they're working on the hardware. In fact, I don't know if I have a video here. I think I included this in the in the video I did. So this is Lanyu, which is the crew vehicle that will land on the moon. So they've got this pulley system to make it like moon gravity, and they're testing the landing system. So yeah, as you can see, they've built a lot of hardware. They're testing it now, and they'll be ready to land on the moon 2030, maybe even 2029 if things go well. So yeah, they're making a lot of progress there. So, but get rid of that. So the hardware's going well. So first of all, if we just go over the ConOps, the concept of operations. So it's very similar to the Apollo concept of operations, but there is one difference, and that is initially they are launching. They're not launching the command module and the lunar lander stacked, which happened in Saturn V, stacked together and launched in one go. So they're doing dual launches. They're launching the crew lander, and they're launching the Lanyu separately. And then they both go to the lunar orbit, and then they automatically dock in lunar orbit. And I don't mention this in the video, but the reason is basically the Long March 10 rocket isn't powerful enough to launch both of those modules together. It can move 27 tons, I think, to lunar orbit, compared to Saturn V, which could launch 48 tons, almost twice as much. So their rocket is just not powerful enough to do a single launch. So they have to 2 separate launches. You can see here. And 3 astronauts are on the spacecraft. And then when in lunar orbit, they autonomously dock. So the command module and the lunar lander dock. And then the crew then descend to the moon's surface. They spend 1 to 3 days on the moon's surface. They have a rover. They do science experiments, whatever, a sample collection. Then they comes back up and they docks with Meng Zhao, and then Meng Zhao basically returns to Earth. It does a skip re-entry, and then it lands probably in North China. So that's the concept of operations, and I kind of do a comparison here, similarities and differences, but generally it's very similar, except the Long March 10 rocket, because it's not as powerful as Saturn V. You've got this dual launch and then the autonomous docking, and also Lang Zhao has a robotic arm, which is different from the Apollo lunar module, and maybe a pressurized cabin. I'm not sure that's decided yet, but it may be pressurized. That would be a different. But other than that, it's basically the same kind of thing as Apollo. And that's kind of what I'm saying in the video. They're not doing anything new. The hardware is kind of very old-fashioned. It's 1970s. It's a escape tower, just like Apollo and Soyuz. It's a 50-year-old technology. And this is the problem with China's space program. They're not actually innovating. They're not building new technology. It's just old technology that's been updated. Either Soviet technology, like their crew vehicle, or like the escape tower, is just a very old technology that's been updated. So it's kind of like a brute force engineering, just spend a lot of money, a lot of labor, and basically do what NASA did in the 1970s with Apollo. That's it. So NASA's doing something very different from that. They're not redoing Apollo, because they did that already. This time they want to go back to the moon sustainably and set up a permanent lunar base. So that requires habitation, power stations, lunar infrastructure, roads, landing pads, nuclear reactor, and resource harvesting, in situ resource utilization, where you basically process lunar water ice, generate water, hydrogen, oxygen for propellants, and basically try and live sustainably on the moon, and then later on to Mars. So that's the plan. It's very different, and NASA is making full use of the private sector. So space startups are involved. They're working on the landers. They're working on the heavy lift vehicles. They're working on the in situ resource utilization, the spacesuits, power systems. So as far as possible, NASA is getting the private sector and private companies to do the innovation, and just funding them and just buying a service. And NASA wants to be one of many customers. So it's a completely different approach to Apollo, and very different to what China's doing. So my opinion is that even though it's going to be slower, so NASA is kind of the tortoise in this scenario, while China's the hare, it will, in the long term and in the medium term, it will provide, it will be more innovative, it will be more cost effective, and you'll end up with new hardware, new innovations, and they will win because they will be able to build a base more cheaply, more cost effectively than China can. And that once China stops the state funding, their space sector just collapses, because they don't compete internationally, and they can't, because their hardware is very old. So that's my contention anyway. People have got different opinions, but that's my take on it. And I do mention about the situation with startups in China. The situation is very bad. 99%. It's been 99% drop in startups. Foreign direct investment is massively down. There's outflows of money from China. There's not really the confidence in China. And this is because of China being very suspicious of billionaires. It's clamping down. There's espionage laws. It's very hard to do anything privately in China. The state control is almost complete. And their space sector is very, very carefully orchestrated by the Chinese Communist Party. So I don't think any innovation is coming from China. That's my point I'm making. But let's see what people were saying about that. They have a lot of comments. So Real17 is saying, I think you described it best. What China is doing is definitely not something to scoff at, but their goal is way different from what the US, NASA, is trying to achieve. And I'm very glad that you showed the comparison to China's current moon mission to the Apollo, because it really puts things into perspective. SpaceX and Blue Origin's moon landers are titans compared to their moon lander. Lanyu is basically like it's like the lunar module NASA did in the 70s, except it's got a robotic arm. Starship can land 100 tons. It's a massive vehicle, and the Mark II again from Blue Origin is also it's a completely different design. So NASA and the West are innovating with new designs, new concepts, propulsive landing for crew. So there's a lot of new innovation, and you're not seeing that from China. And Joe Gojin is saying people throw shade at Starship all the time, but people forget how crazy new it is. Stoke Space and Starship are about the only spaceships trying to reuse the second stage. The Neutron sort of counts, but still discards the second stage. Yeah, there's a lot of like new designs, concepts being tried in the West, propulsive landing, and basically trying to reuse more of the vehicle, either the first stage or even reusing the second stage. And so yeah, the West is trying new things, and China and Russia are really stuck with like 1970s technology. David Smith Meow saying, Lanyu is like a minimal viable product. Once China lands on the moon, they will build bigger landers. Yeah, probably. Probably, yeah. I mean, while the funding continues, the Chinese space sector is doing very well. There's like a lot of companies involved. There's a lot of money being poured into it. But yeah, I think it's kind of like it's not really new concepts. It's just take what works in the past and just continue using it and maybe upgrading it over time. And also Real One saying, how will those bigger landers get there? China does not have a heavy lift vehicle that's capable of getting tons of mass to the moon. The Lanyu looks like that because that's the most the Long March 10 rocket can carry. Yeah, that's the thing. That's why they didn't do launch, because their new rocket is still not powerful enough to send both of those modules together at the same time. So I do mention the Long March 9, which is kind of like China's Starship vehicle. It looks like Starship. It's reusable, eventually fully reusable. The first stage comes back. It's got like the fins. It's basically a copy of Starship. We'll see how they do with that, but that's in the 2030s, I believe. So we'll see, because that is kind of new for China, and we'll see how well they do with that. I don't know. And then Arg Knight is saying cope, and then Joe Ogint says, then explain why it's cope. China is nothing to wave away, and they're extremely capable when it comes to large projects. But as outlined in the video, they lack the experience in private sector that the US and its partners have. Yes, that's what I'm saying. So Pilgrim Bruce is saying, like you said, it doesn't matter who lands on the moon first. I'll bring myself up here as well. What matters is who develops a lunar economy. So what happens if both the US and China have small outposts on the moon and both discover that it will take 20 years or more before anything there makes money? The Chinese command economy will have a huge advantage in that scenario. Do you know why the US hasn't been back to the moon since Apollo? Because there was no money on the moon. Nixon killed the Apollo program because voters wanted more money spent on social programs, and the military needed more money for Vietnam. Do you know why the SLI is 10 years behind the schedule? Because Congress keeps cutting funding to it every time there is a shift in the political winds. Humanity's future is in space, but I don't think the US has a long-term discipline that is needed to build the infrastructure to make it profitable. So I think like the way we have these long-term projects is if the private sector can make money in space, in low Earth orbit, on the moon, if it can make money, then the government doesn't need to be involved at all. And I gave the prime example of Interloon. Interloon has a commercial contract with another private company, Maybell Quantum, to harvest lunar helium-3 from the moon. So a private launch, private lunar lander, harvesting helium-3, sending it back to Earth, and then a private sale to Maybell Quantum. No government involvement at all. So that's an example of the private sector just having contracts with other companies, and you can another example would be commercial space stations, private crew to commercial space stations. So building the private economy, moving the private economy into space, into orbit, and then to the moon, and then to Mars. So I think that gets around the government stop funding these projects, I believe. So Gaius Enceladus is saying, the US has at least one huge advantage. Private companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, Firefly Aerospace, and so on. Many up-and-comers too. I like the look of Stoke Space. With China being communist, the government has to do everything themselves. Given that they are having trouble now even paying public servants, I have doubts as to how long their space program will last. The same goes for Russia. India are looking good though. They have a huge, well-educated and quite young population, and their space program is progressing really well. If I were the US, I'd look at partnering up with India for some space missions in the next few years. And Colin is saying, agreed, I think partnering with ESA and ISRO, that's the Indian Space Agency, is a good move. I'm glad we are funding all these new startup companies, especially Stoke Space, like you mentioned. I think they have a great design. So yeah, I mean, next year we'll have Stoke Space. We may have Neutron, medium lift vehicle from Rocket Lab later this year or next year. And yeah, we'll have Relativity Space maybe next year. So there's a lot of up and coming commercial launches coming. We'll have lunar terrain vehicles. We'll have the power systems. We have commercial space stations. So there's a lot of activities from private companies happening in space, which is great news. And yes, there's even more comments. Jogo Jin is saying, very informative. However, I do somewhat want China to remain a threat when it comes to space. Rivalry is what started the first space race, and it would sure as hell kick this one into high gear. So basically, it's good to have a competitor and a real competitor, because that will push the US, push ESA and the Western countries to compete very hard to win. So, and Andy Kaufman is saying this: if the US doesn't have competition for a space race, budgets and projects that get us to the moon or further are likely cut. This will slow progress until the private sector gets there. We can already see that the nuclear reactor from the US is kind of like, I'm not sure that would have happened if China didn't say, we're going to put a megawatt nuclear reactor on the moon's surface by 2035. So I think that kind of spurred the US to say, no, we're going to do a nuclear reactor, we're going to do it before China. So I think competition is really good between countries and between like Artemis and the Chinese partnership. And Marty saying, the last time I checked, there were 55 countries involved in the Artemis Accords. Even with much backing, I think the biggest risk to the plan success is the possibility of a US financial collapse caused by the current administration policies. Without NASA at its core, Artemis may stall and give China a much bigger head start. Obviously, NASA is the core of the Artemis. NASA is by far the largest space agency, and they're spending a lot of money on Artemis and hardware. So obviously, NASA needs to be funded at very significant levels for Artemis to continue. But I think even with the budget cuts, it's still $18 billion. So we'll see. I think they have enough funding for the moon, for Artemis moon project, and onto Mars as well, I think. And Nathan Grimberg is saying, can American space companies really claim independence either? How many launches are government launches in NA? Is that North America? Also, I think it's sort of silly to point to Chinese space tech as antiquated. America hasn't been able to land a rover on the moon for 30 years. China landed one on the dark side of the moon a few years ago and returned samples. Well, NASA has right now rovers on Mars, nuclear-powered rovers. So they've been sending rovers to other planets for a long time, including like rovers on Mars right now that are collecting samples. They even have robotic systems that fly on Mars. So NASA is not using antiquated technology. They've got landers on the moon as well with Firefly, and they've got landers on Mars, which have been very, very successful. So yeah, there's that. And we have Tango Alpha November saying, hi, I'm a new viewer, big fan of your content. Thank you very much. Western coverage of Chinese space is very weak. There's a lot of commercial development going on. Of course, funding is part by the government, but it exists. Yeah, I think there's 400 space startups in China. So it's well funded. Space companies in China, but I don't think they're really as independent as they would be in the West, because, as I said in the video, 80% of funding is now government funding, because private sector investors kind of pulled out of China because the regulations, the espionage laws, and the data restrictions. It's very difficult to do anything in China at the moment, especially with something like space, which is very sensitive. So they're not really independent. But yeah, I mean, it's a huge sector, and there's many companies involved. But I did one video on Chinese company, but unfortunately, it's very difficult to get good English language sources for what's happening. It's just, I think you need to speak Mandarin really to cover the Chinese space sector well, which I don't speak. So I can't really cover China that well. So Andy Kaufman saying, how long will it be after Chinese boots on regular until they have a base up there compared to the US? Funding to SLS, HLS is close to dead. What's he saying? Is close to dead anyway, and Starship is still very much a test vehicle. China put a space station in orbit in just a few years, and they won't rest on their laurels once they get their first landing done. Yeah, I mean, China is very impressive. The speed they're executing is just incredible. They can do construction projects of a scale and size that the West cannot match. There's no doubt that while the funding exists, China will do very impressive things. But my point is, they're not innovating. It's basically old technology, which works, but it's not cost effective, and they can't compete on the open market. And I think over the long term, medium to long term, the innovation from the West, the new technology, will outpace and outcompete China over the medium to long term. That's why I say that US and NASA is kind of like a tortoise. It's moving slow compared to China, but eventually it will win the race. Slow and steady wins the race, is my point. And yes, so let's move on to space news, space startup news. So I cover here 3 things. I cover, let's start here. So this is Space Machine's inspection satellite. So I'll bring myself up here. So this is a kind of a new category of space satellites, kind of called safeguarding space. Space is now a contested domain. It's kind of sad that it is that way, but it is, with anti-satellite missiles, China and Russia, and they also have kind of satellites that can inspect, US satellites. So it's contested domain. So you need these kind of safeguarding satellites that can inspect and just to see what other assets are there in space. It could be your own you want to inspect. It could be foreign adversaries. But basically, you want to get close to them. You want to look at them. You want to maneuver around them. And this vehicle will eventually be able to refuel, repair, upgrade satellites. So this is a new category that's very interesting. There's other companies involved in this. You got Orbit Fab, you got Impulse Space, you got Quantum Space. Marty's saying, I don't mean to be rude, but innovation in China is wait till someone else develops something, then copy, steal it. Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. Yeah, I mean, if you look at something that China's done, it looks almost identical to some other vehicle. If you look at Long March 9, it's basically Starship, right? I mean, it's got the fins, it's got the aerodynamic flaps. It's using methane, I believe, as well, and the dimensions are very similar. It's basically a copy. So that's just how China operates. So anyway, yes, this is the Space Machines vehicle. I think it's called Viper, and apparently they will do an inspection of satellite for $2 to $3 million, just like as a service, inspection as a service. So that's the first time I've heard of that. So they will have a vehicle in 2026, and yeah, you can. I guess you can buy the satellite, or you could just pay for an inspection, which may be the cheaper option. And the second segment was on the MTO, or Mars Telecommunications Orbiter. So this is funded to $700 million in the One Big Beautiful Bill in July. So even without a request for proposal from NASA, already 3 companies have said, yes, okay, we'll bid. Lockheed Martin, Blue Origin, and another company. I mentioned the other company, Rocket Lab, I think, saying we are going to make a proposal for this Mars Telecommunications Orbiter. And this will be used for manned missions and robotic missions. Basically, it's a big satellite that can handle communications. So it can communicate with surface assets and then send the signal back to Earth and vice versa, from Earth to this satellite and then down to the planet. So, yep, $700 million. 8 companies potentially could bid. If you've basically a company submitted a proposal for the Mars sample return, then they can now submit a proposal for the MTO. And so 3 bid. Interesting enough, SpaceX has not bid. So I'm not sure whether the Starlink will be just for them, just for Starship as their private communications, or whether they're going to bid for this. We'll see, I guess. And the other thing I mentioned was the lunar grid, which is a lunar power system service for the moon. And you can see the vertical, called VSATs, vertical solar array towers. Astrobotic basically building this tower here. You can see them here. So basically you've got the VSAT one that's 10 kilowatts, and then this extra large one which is 50 kilowatts. This is absolutely gigantic. It's 25 meters tall. But of course you don't have wind on the moon, so you can do it really tall. It doesn't matter. So that, it makes sense to make it really tall. And then you can actually see in the render, you can see this power cable here. So this little rover, it's a cube rover, very small rover, and it's laying a cable connecting all the VSATs together, and then you have a grid, and that can power habitats, surface equipment, rovers, whatever. And if you need more power, you can just land another VSAT and connect it. So I say in the video, potentially this could complement the nuclear reactor. So solar power on its own is enough for a habitat, especially initial habitat. You know, each one of these is 10 kilowatts. And if you use the big one, it's 50 kilowatts, just one. I mean, that could power the entire base camp just with one of these. So solar's enough. Maybe a backup system, fuel cell backup system. So I'm saying the nuclear power system could be dropped directly into Shackleton crater and use that power for lunar ice harvesting. So any kind of mining processing operation requires vast amounts of power, probably in the megawatt range. But you could have a demo mining site to begin with, based on using the nuclear power system. So anyway, that's my thoughts on that. And Marty's saying, with more startups working on lunar infrastructure, the lunar base is looking more and more likely in the long term. Yeah, you've got power systems, you've got habitats, you've got unpressurized rovers, you've got pressurized rovers, you've got lunar data relays, you've got landers, you've got heavy lift vehicles, you've got the whole ecosystem, and you've got ISRU, you've got like helium-3, lunar ice harvesting, like the list goes on and on and on. There's a lot of private sector investment and work, hardware being built for the moon, and a lot of that could then be repurposed for Mars. And you've got the spacesuit as well. You've got imaging services for the moon from Firefly. So there's a lot happening on the moon, and I can see that all going to Mars as well. So yeah, it's gradually we're getting there. We're getting the whole ecosystem, and it's not just individual companies; it's the whole ecosystem working together. So, for instance, with the lunar grid, that's a key enabler for everything else. You know, you need power for your rovers and for your mining operation or whatever. And Hurricane 1668 says, as space becomes a warfighting terrain. I'm 71, and anyone my age remembers all the protections put into place to prevent that. When TF did that become the norm? Very nonchalant, very nonchalant and totally disheartening. I'm aware that's kind of disheartening, and there was a time where that wasn't the case, but I think we can all agree now, right, that space is a warfighting domain. It just is. There's a lot of satellites up there. The X-37B was launched the other day, right? The kind of mini space shuttle that's operated by the US Department of Defense or the US Space Force. So there's a lot of kind of military equipment, satellites up there already. We're going to have Golden Dome over the next 3 years. China has a lot of inspection satellites, so does Russia. So I think we can all agree that it's a warfighting domain right now. Yeah, and it's just the way it is, unfortunately. So other space news. Nord Space, I covered them in a video fairly recently. They're a Canadian space startup, and they are launching a suborbital rocket next week, I believe. So they tweeted they put on X, Crew 1 and Crew 2 have arrived at Space Launch Complex 2 of Nord Space's Atlantic Spaceport Complex in St. Lawrence, Newfoundland. Apparently I say Newfoundland wrong. It's just one word. Anyway, setup and tests begin tonight ahead of next week's historic launch. So yes, that's very exciting. Canada's first space company that can launch rockets into space. This one is suborbital, and it's only 10% fully fueled, so it's just like a demo. But if this goes well, I'm sure they'll go 50% and 90%, then 100%. Basically, fully test out the envelope for the Tigra. I think it's Tigra, and then they've got a Tundra, which is an orbital rocket. So they're making a lot of progress, and hopefully they launch successfully next week. And then we have Stoke Space, American space startup. So much progress is in just one photo. Lightning protection systems going in, umbilical tower welding underway, fresh steel lean to rising, launch mount shoring coming out, plus diverter frame and surface fabrication all happening right now at Slick 14. So yes, so that's make myself full screen here. So that's Stoke Space. They should be launching next year. Their technology, this is the thing in the West, fantastic new technology, aerospike engine, and propulsive landing of the second stage, and an active heat shield. Basically, liquid hydrogen at the bottom, and it's also part of the heat shield. So it boils off and cools the vehicle as it's coming into land. Brand new technology, very exciting, and this is what the US and what the West is doing. It's innovating, and China's just really copying. So that's my thoughts on the space race. And yeah, we've got Stoke Space, we've got Relativity Space, we've got Rocket Labs Neutron later this year. For Europe, we've got ISAR Aerospace. They've already made one launch attempt. They could be launching again later this year or next year. You've got Rocket Factory Augsburg, you've got Skyroarer, you've got Arbex, you've got PLD Space, and more. There's Latitude Space. So you've got a lot of companies. In Australia, you've got Gilmore Space, Space Machines Inspection Satellite is Australia. You've got InnoSpace from South Korea. You've got Interstellar Space from Japan. So there's a lot of activity in space. There's a lot of space startups doing launches, doing in-space, and doing lunar infrastructure. So it's all very exciting, and I will be covering all of it on this channel. And yeah, so in terms of what I want to do next week, I want to do something on lunar infrastructure, lunar roads and landing pads. I want to do nuclear propulsion. That would be nuclear thermal propulsion, nuclear electric propulsion. I want to cover that. And I've got quite a few other things I want to cover as well. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. And thank you for joining today. And I will see you next week at the same time. Thank you.